This is the homework help for Math 3, Unit 2, Worksheet 5. So Math 3, Unit 2, Worksheet 5, solving and graphing quadratic. So I'm going to start with a question on the back side. So we're going to start with question number 5. So we want to solve the following quadratic equations for x. So when I look at this, I only have one x in the whole problem. So it's the quantity squared. So I want to solve by square rooting. So the first thing I need to do is isolate the squared term. So I'm going to subtract 9. And then divide by 2. And then once I get the squared term by itself, I want to square root. So I want to get rid of the squared. So I'm going to square root both sides. And the square root of something squared is absolute value. And then when I square root a negative number, that I want to pull out that negative and make it an I. So the square root of -1 is an imaginary number. And then once I have an absolute value, it solves like all the rest of the absolute value equation. So I want to split it into 2. So I have my positive version and then my negative version. So subtract 3. And I always want to put the bottom term first and then the top term last for standard form. And then for this one, same idea. So I want to divide the negative over. So I'm going to divide by -1. So that will just be -I. And then to isolate the x, I'm going to subtract 3. And then the bottom number first, and then the radical second. And so I have two different solutions. They're the same but opposite when adding and subtracting, so I can leave it, or I can write it as -3 plus or minus I root 2. Okay. And then let's go ahead and take a look at question number 12. So here I have two variables, so I can't isolate the quantity. So if I can't isolate, I need to distribute. And then when I have it multiplied out, it always needs to be equal to 0. So I need to move the 7 to the other side. And so once I get to here, I always want to try to factor it. So if I look at my factors of 7 are just 1 and 7, and there's no way 1 and 7 will work to give me a 3. So I should always try to factor, and then if I can't factor, I have to use quadratic formula. So then once I get to here, for quadratic formula, I need to determine what are my values for a, b, and c. So a is the coefficient of the squared term, so that coefficient is 1. B is the coefficient of x, which is -3, and then c is the constant, so -7. And then the formula I want to use is x equals -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, and then all divided by 2 times a. So then I just have to make sure I have this memorized because I won't get it for any test. And then I replace A, B, and C with the different values. Okay. So I would have x equals, and then I want to do the opposite of B. So instead of -3, it's going to turn into +3. Plus or minus, and then I want to square my b term. So -3 times -3 is a +9, minus 4 times A times C over 2 times A. And then we always want to make sure that we're simplifying the square root portion first. So we always want to simplify this completely before we try to reduce. So I'm going to have a double negative here, which is going to turn into a positive. And then 4 times 1 times 7 is 28. And 2 times 1 is just 2. And then I'm still working on trying to simplify the square root. And so I'm going to add 28 and 9 together. And then 37 doesn't break down at all, and so then that would be my final answer.